guiar e instruções para síntese de fala. You was hauling boxed pork from a plant near Beckley, an 8-hour run down to a deli warehouse off County Road 17. My rig was a 2012 Kenworth T660, the kind you can hear a mile away when you let it sing. I keep a small bag of tools behind the driver's seat, cable ties, a flashlight, rags soaked in diesel. It's habit. The load was strapped, reefer set to 36, and I double-checked the cams at the scale house because you don't go without a pre-trip. Around sunset, the mist came up fast and low. You know, the kind that hugs the cab and makes your mirrors useless. My GPS showed a straight shot. My CB lit up with the usual chatter, 10-4, copy, a guy with a bad habit of singing gospel into channel 19. Then a steady pattern of 3 knocks over top of everything. That's truckers on a different net. I answered on work channel and got nothing but static. Comms were patchy all that evening. At a blind switchback at mile marker 72, I saw an old rusted tractor trailer sitting like it had been there for years, nose in the bushes. Its trailer was half off the pavement and its plates were missing. That's the sort of sight that makes you check your tires and your brakes even when you don't have to. I eased past, nodded to myself for being cautious, and kept the diesel steady. 15 minutes later, my reefer alarm beeped, temperature rise. I pulled to the shoulder and killed the truck. I have a paper trail for every load, and I always check the obvious first. Power, breaker, cam locks, everything looked fine. I climbed down, popped the hood, and the smell hit me. Not hot oil or coolant, but spoiled meat. My skin tightened. I cracked the trailer seal and saw streaks on the interior floor where something had been dragged. Not gore, just the dull smear of something wet and dark in the way that tells you it wasn't clean. I called dispatch. I got a problem, I said. Reefer dropped. They told me to restart and run to the next stop. They'd be there in 4 hours with a tech. I told them I was at a pullout and I wasn't moving freight that'd spoil. They sighed at the other end like I was costing them minutes. I closed the trailer and climbed back up. My seatbelt snapped in place by itself. I punched it once with my palm as if to check it, and it responded with a little tug as though someone had latched it tight. I told myself it was just a belt and a vibration. A truck idled up behind me, headlights bright, a silhouette the size of a barn. The driver waved me over slow. He had no plate on his door either. "Trouble?" he called, voice even. "Reefer's down," I answered. His truck's grill had a handprint of dust wiped away in a circle, like someone had looked through and then left. He said, "You see 'em?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. He only pointed at the trailer door. When I looked, there were smudges, lines where someone had dragged their hands down the ribbed metal.
I don't have a knack for stories like that. I have a knack for numbers and seals. I pried the door and there was an extra pallet, 2x4 in stack, with a muddy pair of work boots on top. No body. Not even anything that could say what had been there. Just boots, damp and caked, and the imprint of toes as if the boots had been worn into the wood. By the time we finished inspecting, the other driver had left without a word. He drove off like the road swallowed him up. I started the reefer, the alarm went silent, and the temperature read normal. I drove on with a knot in my throat. That night at the warehouse, the foreman said he'd never scheduled a pallet on my slot. The cameras they had on the dock showed only empty concrete. No tractor, no boots. My manifest matched my logs. I wrote, "Equipment malfunction," because there isn't a box for boots that evaporate. I slept in the sleeper that night with the radio on and the curtains tucked tight. My hands kept finding the seatbelt and feeling the way it had tugged like somebody living. The next month, I stopped running county roads after dusk. I still get the sense sometimes when I open the reefer doors in cold weather, that faint trace of wet earth and old leather, and I watch the pallets like they might breathe. Lou. There's a pattern you start to recognize. Small misalignments in your day add up until the way the world works is askew. The next story comes from Marla, one of the few women I know who ran an oversized load through coal country for more than a decade. I was on a permit haul, hauling a bridge girder, full length on a lowboy, running nights through southern West Virginia. The rig was a 2015 Peterbilt, big, honest, all torque. And the escort van was an old Ford with a driver I'd known since licensing runs. Oversized moves get prayerful planning. Permits, pilot cars, local cops, the whole kingdom. We were 3 trucks that night, me in the middle, an escort ahead, and a follow truck behind. The load sat high and lumbered like a caged thing. The climb up into the mountain was steep, and the fog pooled in pockets like milk. At 2 in the morning, the radio lit up with a mile-by-mile update from the lead escort. Clear to switchback at the old stone wall. We eased, inching like a stack of locomotives. The escort called again, voice tight as wire. Keep center, keep it slow. I kept it low and steady. Around a narrow hairpin, the escort flashed hazard lights and went hard left to block an oncoming car. There shouldn't have been a civilian car on that stretch. We had permits and county cops watching. The pilot waved a hat at the other driver, and the car passed us on the wrong side like it wanted to race history. The car's headlights caught on my load, and God help me, the light showed a smear across the girder, like someone had dragged their fingers through dust and left a handprint that ran the length of the steel. I asked the escort if he'd seen anything on camera. He said nothing.
He kept his mic close, jaw clenched. We coaxed the load forward. At the next widen, the follow truck flicked on its spotlights, and I saw it. A long black stain along the side of the road, like rut marks, but dark and damp, sitting where no tire would normally make one. My palms were slick. We parked at a lot with a closed diner, and the 3 of us got coffee from a machine while the pilots called the county. The driver of the other car was nowhere to be found. The sheriff came with a flashlight and chewed sunflower seeds. "We had a missing persons call earlier," he said. "Old man from Cedar Hollow." He frowned. "But we found his truck empty up at mile 12. Keys gone. No sign of him." The escort van's driver rubbed his thumb over his eyebrow and said, "He was waving at me like he knew me, like he was glad to see me." No one believed the sheriff when he said the cameras showed no one on the wide. And in the morning, during daylight, the smear on the girder was gone, like someone had wiped away chalk. No residue. We checked the steel, no damage, no dents, and the girder rode clean. After that haul, I left the permit runs for a while. I still drive heavy, but only daytime, and only where I can see the edges of the road. My old escort buddy took to driving a car of his own, never letting it sit parked at the shoulder. We don't talk about it much in the yard. Sometimes, when I pass a bridge, I look at the steel and think of the length of that black streak, and how it could run right between places where a man might vanish. Marla. You can feel a small change in a driver after one of those runs. It's in the way they tighten their hand on the wheel, and in the fact they start to prefer the hum of tires on straight highway to the whisper of back roads. The next voice is from Hank, who used to run timber and kept his rig cleaner than he kept his house. I ran a logbook route for a mill up near Elkins. Old trucks,
heavy chains, and a lot of gossip. I drove a 2008 International with a flatbed and a loader bolted to the back. Loads get messy. Bark, sap, chain grease. You come back looking like you slept in a sawmill. One afternoon, I was coming off a logging spur after a set of pickups took too tight and tore a fender off the south side. The radio was quiet, and the road smelled like cut pine. It's an old county road with a small bridge over a dry creek bed and the pullout where hunters used to stop. I caught my mirror and saw a rig stuck sideways in the mud, a rusted old truck with no roof. The cab was open and empty, and there were children's stickers on the door, the kind you only see on homeowner trucks. It was the sort of thing that makes you check your load straps twice. I pulled to the shoulder and called to see if anyone needed help. No answer. I shut the engine off, and the world shrank down to the hiss of cooling metal. The wind came through the trees and carried a sound underneath it, like someone humming soft and wrong.
At mile marker 40, my trainer locked his hands on the wheel and said over the mic, "Smitty, you ever get the feeling you're being followed by something that doesn't need a road?" I laughed because I was young and I wanted to sound brave. He said, "Don't laugh." When I looked in the passenger mirror, I saw a figure in the back of his sleeper. It didn't sit right. No shoulders, like a shadow pressed into fabric. It didn't have a shape that made sense. I told everyone at the depot I'd seen nothing but fog and kids. They told me to log it as fog and keep the truck in good order. I kept the red glove in my pocket for a long time, taking it out when I felt the edges of the road curve wrong. My trainer quit 6 months later and took a job delivering wiring harnesses on the coast. He calls sometimes and says he still wakes up at 2 a.m. and thinks he hears small hands tapping the wall of his sleeper. Smitty, you learn when you're new that fear is less about ghosts and more about experience. The road finds the holes in your knowledge and fills them with things you can't name. I've got more stories about CB chatter that spells names, about rigs that park into the fog and never come back, about a run where every mile marker counted down instead of up. There's the one with the man who radioed a warning and then disappeared from dispatch logs. There's the old driver who swore a junction turned itself inside out on a certain night. I'll move on to the next voice. An old man named Boone with a cracked knuckle and a way of making the dark sound older than it is. I had been in trucking 40 years when this happened. I run a skidder sometimes, heavy hauling through the holler. My rig then was a 98 Mac, battered but faithful. One night in November, the weather fell off quick like someone shut a cabinet. Frost on the mirrors, and the fog came in like a curtain. The road I was on narrows to one lane over a creek with a guardrail rusted and thin. It's the sort of place where you slow and make room for ghosts. That night, a trucker waved me over to the pullout and said, "Boone, you ever seen the mile marker with the X?" I told him no. He looked at me like he'd seen a ghost himself and said, "Don't go by it twice." I passed the marker once. I counted the posts out of habit, the way you count breaths. The X was painted on a post by the fence, ugly and flaking. When I turned around to make a run back for a missed strap, I found the marker again at the exact spot where I'd first seen it, as if I hadn't moved at all. My hands started sweating on the wheel. That's when I heard the telltale sound I've always feared, the slow, metallic scrape of something big struggling along the edge of road. I pulled over and shut down. The scrape passed like an old truck trying to get traction in mud. The air pressed. Then I saw headlights coming up fast from the fog,
They moved like they were walking.
They weren't carriage lights. They floated, sliding left and right, unsteady as a breath. They passed by the marker without illuminating it. When they were gone, the X had turned to something else, 3 lines like tally marks. I took that as my cue to get the hell out. I didn't stop at the feedlot down the way. I kept on driving until the fog thinned and my hands cramped like a man who forgave himself only the distance between him and the next town. Months later, I drove by that stretch again, and the post had nothing on it at all. No X, no marks. County said no one painted anything there, and the wood looked older than the paint I'd seen. I don't go back by that road if I don't have to. Boone. You feel the change. Drivers you know start to sleep with the radio on low. They stop picking up roadkill on the shoulder. They start to come into the yard at dawn and leave at dawn because something about morning light tells them the world is still the same. There are more. There's the one where a dispatcher laughs until the line goes dead. The one with the vanishing hitchhiker who leaves only a smear on the trailer. And the man who found his rig's license plate carved into the inside of his sleeper with no idea who had been there. Each one keeps the same beat. Ordinary routine, a wrongness that begins small, a spike of dread, and then whatever comes next. Sleep with the lights on, a sold rig, a nameless sense that a county owes you nothing. I've heard them all. Told half by drivers who are still on the job, and half by men who sold their plates and learned to stay home. If you drive through those mountains, keep to the lanes you know. Keep your paperwork tight and your lights brighter than you think you need. Trust the radio when it goes quiet, and don't trust a place that looks the same no matter how you pass it. There's at least one more I want to tell you before I stop, about a stretch where the mile markers count down and the people you pass stop keeping names. Stay with me. There's at least one more I want to tell you before I stop, about a stretch where the mile markers count down and the people you pass stop keeping names. Stay with me. They call that road the Backhand, though nobody seems to know who started the name. It's a 2-lane that wedges between ridges so close the sun forgets to climb straight over it. In daylight, it's farm fences and a feed store and a church spire that looks like an old tooth. At night, it rearranges itself. Drivers talk about the Backhand in the same way they talk about bad weather, as something you can feel on your spine before it arrives. I heard the first telling of it from a kid named Lenny. Lenny was small for a man who spent his life in cabs, and he had a laugh that never seemed to stop right where it should. He ran with a company that moved refrigeration units across state lines, and on his 3rd month he came into the yard pale as an undershirt. "Did you go by the markers?" someone asked him. You never ask a question like that half-heartedly. The radio goes quiet. People close their sticky cups. "Yeah," Lenny said. His hands wouldn't quit trembling. "Started at 38. Felt normal. Felt the road under me and all that. Then they started to... I don't know." He looked sideways like a man afraid of being overheard by something under the benches. They went backward. People scoffed. There's always a laugh at first. The yard is full of men who have to tell a truth to keep from going quiet. But his voice caught on the laugh like a fish. They ticked down. 37, 36. I thought I'd missed a turn. I checked my GPS. Yeah, I know. No help.
Then the people on the shoulder began to look like faces I'd seen before. Not strangers, faces like old church friends, or a coach from a high school that closed, or a woman who used to cut hair in a place I'd passed once for a hook. I waved, and they waved back. I mouthed names, and nothing came out. My mouth kept the shape of the name, but the sound wouldn't come. He stopped there for a beat, as if trying to pull the syllable of a name from the air, and it's snapping like brittle glass. I got to 20. My buddy on the radio, he said, "You there, Lenny?" And I heard myself say, "Yeah." But then he called me Mike. He'd always called me Lenny. He seemed surprised when I told him my name, like he couldn't see the letters. Names, you learn quick, are a kind of currency among drivers. We trade them across CBs like we trade hours. Your name is your handle. Your license is your face. So when the name starts to slip, when the people you pass give you a name you've never carried, or when your own name feels like someone else's jacket, it makes the hair on your arms stand up. Lenny pushed through that run. He said the mile markers kept going down. He passed a boy who used to sit on his porch when he was a kid, though Lenny hadn't left his home county in years. He waved at a man who'd been his neighbor once, and whose name Lenny hadn't remembered until his tongue tried to say it, and it tasted wrong. When the markers hit 7, he pulled over at a turnout, hands on the wheel, and the radio went thick like honey. Static filled the cab with a sound like people breathing through mattresses. "I got out," Lenny said. "I thought fresh air would help." I stepped out and I could hear them walking down the shoulder, metallic like trolleys. But when I looked, they were walking like they weren't walking. They didn't have names on them. They were smiling slack, mouths like the same road had been chewed up and spat back. One of them held up a hand like he was gonna speak my name, but it came out as a number, like he was counting me down. By the time Lenny got to 0, he couldn't remember why he'd left the yard that morning. He remembered his rig, the weight, the smell of coolant, the song on the radio, but not the knot in his chest that had sent him on the road. He drove till dawn, and when he pulled into a truck stop, he filled out his log with his hand shaking, and the name he wrote looked like someone else's handwriting. He quit not long after, sold his plates and moved back home. He never came to the yard again. That was one telling. There are others. Hank, the man with the dogs that follow him like they know the route better than he does, said his girl used to live in a town the backhand touches. He went through there in a snowstorm 10 years back, hauling a load of shingles. He said he saw an old man sweeping his porch who used to be the pastor at a church Hank never attended. Hank called his name because that's what you do when you see people you know, you confirm them. The man swept, looked up, and lifted 2 fingers. He didn't speak. He only lifted the fingers like he was telling the world how many steps he had left. "You know what he told me later?" Hank said to me, and when Hank told a story, he rubbed the word with his mouth like he was polishing it. The pastor came to Hank's house a week later, said somebody came by and asked for the pastor's name. He couldn't remember it, sat down with a Bible, and the name was gone, like the page never had letters on it. He started to think names were for people who weren't from here anymore. There's a smarter kind of supernatural that never raises itself up with a show. It slides in the margins and steals your receipts. It makes you misplace names the way a river moves gravel. The backhand doesn't scream. It collects. Some drivers try to fight it with paper. They tape notes to the dash: Mom, Sarah, Jim, Mac. The notes are quick anchors, something to look at when the mind loosens. Others tattoo names inside their lids. One old man I knew kept a roster of names in a spiral notebook, everything for his life arranged like a truck manifest. He'd run his finger down the pages each night, like a man checking the straps on cargo. There's safety in repetition, we say. We map the roads in muscle memory. But the backhand reminds you that memory is a muscle that can go numb. Near the middle of the road, there's a bridge where the markers can't decide how to behave. Some drivers find the posts there numbered in sequences that loop: 12, 11, 10, 9, and then 27. Others claim the numbers shrink until they're numbers at all, only symbols that look like tally marks or scratches made by something with a thumb. Boone saw tally marks where an X had been. That's how these places play with sight. There's a night I remember, clear as gauges. I was leaning toward winter, the windows iced at the corners, and I took a run to pick up a load the yard needed. I'd been on the road long enough to have a kind of friendly contempt for strange stretches. You'll learn to be brave because fear is expensive. The job doesn't pay for men frozen in turnouts. Still, I kept the radio on low, the old CB close to my teeth, because silence in the holler has a way of sewing itself into the wheel.
It slipped from me like a coin gone down a drain. At zero, the hum you feel on a good rig when the engine settles was replaced by a sound I can only call a silence that moves. It rolled over the cab like a slow tide, and then, for a pulse, I knew everything and nothing at the same time. I knew the name of the kid again, and then I knew I had once been called something else that wasn't mine. I hit the last marker, and the world rearranged itself like a pocket being turned inside out. The woman on the bridge was gone. The boy was gone. The road looked the same, but there was a smell of old books, an attic smell. There was a small white scrawl on the top of the post, a single word that looked like my name, and like an old war hymn at the same time. I stopped the rig. I walked out with my hand on the cold metal. You know how sometimes you find a coin you thought you lost? You hold it and remember where you got it? This was like that, only the coin remembered me first. The scrawl had my name, but it was misspelled like someone trying to remember while half asleep. It was my name the way a photograph of someone else looks like you because you're looking too hard. I took a picture of it, stupidly, the kind of thing people do when they can't trust their eyes. My phone saved the image and timestamped it like a lie. When I sent the picture to the yard, Joe answered with a joke emoji, and then, in the quiet of what we say to each other at 2 a.m, he asked me what my name was. I told him. He paused. On the radio, his voice came back small. "You sure?" he said. "I'm sure," I said. I wasn't sure anymore. I felt like one of those old men who woke and put on 2 different shoes. Joe said, "If you're not, come on back. Park up. We'll talk. We'll check your dash cam. You can sleep in the lounge." We talk about names like we talk about weather. We measure them by habit. But names, it turned out, were not only what others called us. Sometimes names are the hinges of the house you live in. When the hinges loosen, the house turns into something else. I didn't sleep that night. I drove until the road spat me into market lights. The yard looked honest under sodium bulbs. Men were swapping coffee for stories, and nobody seemed to be losing their names. But I watched faces too closely after that. I watched the way the guys' mouths worked over a name, how sometimes it took them a second longer to find it. I watched the lighter way they touched the backs of pals' hands, like confirming that the hand belonged to the same man who'd lent you sugar 2 winters ago. We learned ways to protect ourselves. We keep lists in our wallets. We call out names over the CB like prayers.
We sing the old trucker songs even when we hate the tune, because rhythm holds places in your head. We invented little rituals, knocking 3 times on the dash before a bridge, whispering the names of the men we love into the vents as we pass certain mile markers.
It's all superstition and habit, but superstition is just memory in costume. There's a tale that if you manage to pass the backhand without losing a name, the road will try another thing on you. It will return something. A name you'd forgotten will come back with a key attached. Maybe you remember a whole afternoon from childhood, or a face you'd given up on, or a woman whose laugh you had muffled for years under the daily slate. The road takes, and sometimes it gives. That's what makes it more like a living thing than an accident. But it is unforgiving. Folks who stay near it too long, truckers who camped at the rest area for a week to save on lodgings, thrill seekers who want to see what happens. Some of them woke up speaking names that were not theirs, or with their own names written in the margins of their sleep in ink they couldn't trace. The worst are the ones who go to sleep and forget the sound of their mother's voice. People who used to hold names like badges find their badges gone. The nameless are not violent. Violence isn't necessary when you can take a man apart quietly. Boone's tally marks, Lenny's blank pocket of memory, my own ugly scrawl on a post, they tie back to one thing I believe now. Roads are memory machines. They are cued to collect what passes over them. They remember wheels and names and the smell of someone's coffee, and sometimes they feel lonely and start keeping pieces of what they think they need. I don't pretend to have an answer. I only have habits. If you must go down the backhand, do a few things. Say your name before you shift into gear. Write it on paper and burn the paper in the cab if it's safer that way. Keep a ledger with the names of the people who matter to you, wives, kids, mothers, men who taught you how to check oil, and read it aloud like you're checking straps. Sing a name out loud and hold it until it feels heavy and real in your mouth. And if a stranger calls you by a name that isn't yours, don't correct him. Just keep repeating the name you know in the silence between his words. There's one rumor among the older drivers, told low like it's something holy, that if you ever lose your name, you can find it again at a yard where the men haven't let the radio fall quiet. Names are contagious in a good way when people don't let go. A yard is a place that holds small rituals, that keeps the hymn book open. If your name escapes you on the road, go back to a yard where someone will call you by the name you were given. Let them anchor your syllables like a man lashing cargo. I still drive by that stretch, sometimes out of necessity, more often out of some foolish need to see if I'm braver than I feel. Each trip leaves a small change, my keys in a different pocket, a song I have to remind myself to remember. The road takes little things and leaves me with a sharper eye for what remains. He makes them sit at the long table and close their hands over the rim. The radio plays a hymn under the chatter, something with a chorus that repeats a name like a drum beat. Men take turns saying the name they remember the man by, Danny, Mac, Ray, and they tell a quick, true story. The night he fixed a trailer in a snowstorm, the way he whistled when he tightened a strap. Memory is contagious that way. It likes to hitch along on another man's anecdote. I watched Lenny there once. He stood 3 feet from his life and couldn't find a seam to climb back in. His eyes were wide and very young.
They called our names for him, mine included, awkward and kinder than he deserved, and some small part of him trembled like a loose wire. The ledger moved between hands. Higgins read aloud a name that belonged to Lenny's father. Lenny's mouth shaped it wrong at first, then softer, then like someone testing a key. It did not come all at once. It came like a tide, with the voices of the yard pushing and holding. There are no miracles in the yards, not in the way road stories promise miracles. The recoveries are cheap and stubborn. A good night's sleep, a name ground down by repetition, a radio that refuses silence. Sometimes the man who left with his name back on his tongue keeps it for years. Sometimes the road claims it again a month or a year later. That is how the exchange goes. Borrow, pay a little, lose a little. And yards make the payments less ruinous. When I leave Higgins' yard, the lamps spill the lot into soft gold and cast the sleepers long. The highway waits like an expectation. I tuck the ledger's shadow into the glove compartment, turn the key, and let the engine find its old hum. Names sit in the cab now, warm as cups. I say mine under my breath as I roll back onto the black, as one might murmur a benediction before a long night. The road remembers. So do we, sometimes because other people remember for us. There are other ways to keep a name too, small, private things that look like superstition until they prove themselves practical. I have a way of folding the map so my mother's name falls right on the crease. Boone knots his handkerchief with a stitch he learned from an army sergeant. Lenny started carrying a dented harmonica and blows the first 2 bars of a song his brother used to play. None of it is perfect. The road is patient and inventive. But the yard teaches a quieter lesson. Names are social things. They are held in 5 mouths better than 1. And if your name ever slides off the tongue, go where people keep saying it until it sticks again. Soon the high country narrows and the markers thin. The hum changes pitch as you climb. I keep my light on and my hands steady. Somewhere ahead, a post will have new scratches. Somewhere behind, a ledger will close, and the radio will never quite go silent.